anybody can be CEO and command a company's worth of robots.
The thing is so damn big that the really only way to move it is to fly it.
We still have 72% or $6 billion per month of revenue that's been unannounced.
I mean, we're entering an age where there's unlimited need for intelligence. The big game, StarMine, the platform that makes that work is Starship.
If it's 10 gigawatts by the end of next year or the mid of 2028, you're potentially looking out on that.
Starlink becomes the backhaul for the data. I think the device is right in front of us, staring right back at us. It's called Optimus.
Having Optimus in your home is a substitute for going to a restaurant.
We are disappearing into the network.
Starlink will deliver a majority of the world's internet. Hey, Phil, how you doing? It's been 3 weeks since we last talked.
Yeah.
But I'm glad we waited a week because we had some interesting events yesterday that I think are worth talking about today.
For sure. Yeah.
But first of all, how was your vacation?
It was awesome. I mean, I sat on the beach for 2 weeks. Kind of like what I would do if I retired. Oh yeah, I sort of am retired. Yeah, I grew up in an amazing place in coastal New Jersey. People might say, "Oh, I don't know what that could possibly be like," but it's quite idyllic actually. And my parents still live there. They have a beautiful home, and my brother lives about a mile away from them, and also has a beautiful home. And so I've been going there since I lived there. You know, I go over there every summer. My wife, my kids show up there, and sometimes I stay longer than them. And this time I did a little bit longer. Mm-hmm. And it's just people that saw our show 3 weeks ago. I happily hauled a Starlink to the beach, Starlink Mini, which is the damn coolest thing I heard. And it's really neat. I was saying to you a minute ago how like it was such a novelty to do it, just kind of whimsical, you know, haul to the beach, see what that's like. And then the beach got busy on a Saturday and the cell service went to nothing, and I was trying to listen to a podcast, and so I pulled it out of my backpack, turned it on, and you have a little battery, a pretty sizable, a little but sizable battery that keeps it going for 4.5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty.
You probably could have sold some access. Yeah, you could have paid for it.
That I would do very well at selling Starlink, because I got into conversations with people about it for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot to mention the most amazing, not amazing, but just kind of fun story. I was talking to a gentleman down by the water. You know, we were both had our feet in the ocean, and we were talking, and then someone came up and said, "Are you Phil Beisel? I recognize you from the show."
Nice.
I'm like, what? Like, how's that possible? Yeah, me and my kids watched it all the time. My 2 sons, you know. I love you guys. I'm like, oh, cool.
That's really cool. Those are cool moments when that happens. Yeah.
So
awesome. Well, we've got a lot to talk about, so let's get right into it.
Yeah,
we've got SpaceX had their first quarterly earnings call as a public company yesterday, and you and I got dressed up to analyze the financials. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Not so much the financials, but just the call itself and what we learned. Of course, none of this is financial or investment advice, tax, or legal advice. So we're just 2 guys talking on the internet. Here's kind of just a snapshot of the quarter. The blue numbers are revenue. And we've got the 3 business units there starting on the left, and on the right side is the total. So we've got revenue from the space division of just under $1 billion. We've got revenue from the connectivity division at 4.2 billion, Starlink.
Right.
And then revenue from AI of about $2.5 billion. The salmon colors, the reddish color there, is the operating income. And so for the space division, a loss of about $500 million, no surprise there. Mm-hmm. On the connectivity side, 1.66 billion of operating income. And then on the AI side, a loss of about 1.2. Mm. Then we have the adjusted EBITDA, which the biggest thing here is adjusting for depreciation charges. And the significant difference here is on the AI side, where you've got operating loss of 1.2 billion goes to adjusted EBITDA of a positive 1.15 billion. And then from a total company perspective, 7.8 billion in the quarter, operating income slight negative, and adjusted EBITDA of 3.5 billion. So pretty solid. And then overlaid on all this is the CapEx for each of the three business units. And of course, the space division is spending money on building Starship and designing that and so on. The Starlink division is also spending money, but the big outlier in terms of CapEx is what we see on the AI side at 15.8 billion in one quarter. And people were freaking out about how much Tesla's spending, right?
Yeah.
But total company-wide CapEx, 18.3 billion. And then here's the same chart just for the first half of the year, just to show that similar in terms of sort of the magnitude or the shape of these numbers. So just quick thoughts on that, Phil, before we go to the next part.
I'm a bit curious. I mean, I think I'm a bit curious about what is in that larger bucket of CapEx when they talk about, the AI division. Is it data center builds? Does that include anything going into Terrafab yet?
Good question. I doubt that there's much going into Terrafab at this point.
Yeah.
Tesla's handling as my understanding, the advanced technology fab on their campus.
True. That's on their property.
Yeah. Now, SpaceX, I suppose, would have acquired land and, in Grimes County. I think that's moving forward.
I'm just wondering if they've done any prepays on any kind of equipment contracts or, stuff that we don't know about. The big stuff. There's a lot of big stuff that has to come in there beyond the building.
Well, there would be perhaps some deals or contracts with ASML.
Yeah, and there's
to make sure they get what they need. Yeah, good question. We don't know yet.
I mean, I think the interesting thing was what their CFO Brett said about the CapEx. He basically said not all CapEx is the same, and he specifically referred to the CapEx in this larger bucket where they're seeing a very immediate, or like he said, within a year return on investment. And he said that you can almost bucket it as COGS.
Yeah, we're going to get into that in a minute. That's actually really, really interesting. I think that's one of the fascinating parts about this call. So before we get there, Phil, let's go over just a couple other things. In terms of Starship, Elon talked about possibly catching the ship as soon as the next flight.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I think many people thought it might be a couple flights away, but he's saying the next one, potentially, which would be exciting. And they're looking to catch the second stage, catch first and second stage of Starlink version 3 this year, possibly catch the ship as soon as next flight. And then he talks about how much, massed orbit they're sending up and that they're going to deliver 80 to 90% of the total Earth massed orbit this year with Falcon. And that's about 2,500 tons.
Yeah.
And then he goes on and talks about sort of what their objectives are a little bit longer term. And he says, we go from 2,500 tons a year to 1 million, potentially 10 million tons per year. And he says it's really a ridiculously profound difference. But that is our plan, and I think we can achieve our plan, he says. What I did here was just kind of visually show it. And Elon was saying on the call that if you map out, what is currently put up in orbit against these numbers, you can't really even see the line. Now, what I did is I put a yellow border around the box to make it even bigger. You can barely see it.
See the line.
Yeah, but barely, So this is the kind of aspiration they have for growth.
I mean, come on. What is the one simple thing that you can say about Elon? Everything, the next thing is always an order of magnitude or more, right? It's always thought in those terms. It's never 2x. It's got to be a minimum of 10x or 100x, et cetera. But I think the interesting thing is, I mean, it's extremely clear that if you watch Flight 13, that the tiles are solid. I think he's basically said that, that's a problem that's pretty much solved, minus some data. The ship had very limited damage, and they pushed it hard. The much greater velocity off the pad or something. I don't know how they characterize it, but so yeah, why wouldn't they catch it? I mean, I also, if you look at some of the secondary footage that they posted the day later, they showed incredible control of Starship in terms of getting it to the landing point.
Mm-hmm.
And some people said, "Oh, that's so there was so much dynamics in that. It would tower catch my." But my observation is, no, I don't think that's the way to look at it at all. The way to look at it is, if they could feather it down, with a little bit greater degree of precision at a higher altitude, that they would have that level of control closer to the tower. So it seems to me that that damn thing is, as controllable or close there to Falcon. That's a big deal.
It's funny when you see the Falcon Heavy boosters land and the speed at which they're hurtling towards Earth. You can't possibly think that they're going to slow down in time, and yet they do perfectly.
Yeah.
Right. It's the same sort of thing here. I think that if we sort of think about it as a human controlling it, and if you're controlling it as a human, you would slow it down much quicker because you just can't handle that kind of deceleration.
Right. Yeah.
But when it's automatic, when it's autonomous, it
doesn't matter.
Perfectly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Flight 13, except for, I guess you could say, except for booster, the rest of the mission was a great success. I think they're towing the thing. Starship feathered itself onto the ocean bed, and then basically, I think they're towing it. I don't know where they're towing it, by the way.
But I'd imagine they'd be towing it back to Perth if that's where they started from. It's quite a journey out to the Indian Ocean location.
It's a journey there. So I felt like I thought that they would bring one of those extreme cargo ships and hoist it onto the cargo ship. And I did some research on that and said, yeah, there are ships like that available that could bring probably something. I forget how. I think the thing's about 170 feet long. Could be wrong, but and they could possibly bed the thing and then move it back to Starbase. But towing it's a whole. I mean, I don't think you're not going to tow it from there back to Starbase.
No. I imagine that they would try to get it back to port somewhere, examine the tiles, do that work.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of
and then from there figure out where they're going to put it.
Right. There's a bunch of things that they can. I mean, the funniest thing about Starship, and we've had this conversation in the past, is that the thing is so damn big that the only way to move it is to fly it on natively, like the way it is intended to fly. I mean, you recall back in the day that they would potentially launch the space shuttle from Canaveral, and then they would land in Edwards Air Force Base in California, and then they would shuttle it back on the top of a 747, which seemed insane. Like, I can't believe that actually occurred. But I don't think that Starship is a candidate for anything like that, other than moving on its own volition.
Yeah.
So, but hey, that mission was successful, and I think Elon's pressing hard to make more forward progress because honestly, as much as I don't know, I'm like always of two minds about that stuff. I'm like, I see a mission and I go, wow, it's only been this amount of time between 12 and 13. And I think about all the stuff that must happen and how many hours these guys, are pressing to get the next. I think the thing about Elon is he's not just demoing a product here. He's building. They're rapidly improving, iterating the platform, and in doing so, that means tons and tons of changes. So, yeah, I mean, I feel like how people are always like so worried about all these insiders selling their stock. I don't think SpaceX people have enough time to get online.
Anybody that I've talked to that's been a SpaceX holder for years is not interested in parting with any of their shares. So I don't know where this narrative is coming from. That
I know we're going to find out. I'm going to find out in the volume tomorrow or so, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I'm not too worried about it at all. In fact, I think it may surprise people how little selling pressure there is.
yeah.
The other thing I thought that was interesting too from his comments was he says it's not out of the question, but at some point, Starlink will deliver a majority of the world's internet, at least in countries where we're allowed to operate. And he says, it's not like the infinity future that'll happen. It's like around, he said, less than 10 years. And I think that's something that's going to surprise people at some point in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years. Just how much of the internet traffic is going through Starlink.
Yeah, I recall he made a really good comment about the early days of Starlink and how commercial customers couldn't necessarily rely on it because of spotty coverage, which really meant that they just didn't have enough satellites in orbit. And now that they do, areas where they cover it, they have complete coverage, 24/7. So, I mean, I think the thing that's interesting about Starlink is I don't think people realize how dramatic the technology of moving data through RF signal progresses over the years. I mean, if you think about how much traffic is carried today over cellular towers versus 10 years and then 20 years ago. So we have this idea in our brains that the way data moves is on cable. Maybe it's fiber, maybe it's coax on last mile for our cable companies. But the truth is the technology is changing, advancing so quickly that companies that are involved in this can pack so many more bits in a carrier signal. It's quite dramatic improvement. And I suspect that when you look at the difference between Starlink V2 mini satellites and the proposed V3s. Now, remember with the Starship mission, Starship 13, they launched, 20 odd true V3 satellites. Now, those they didn't achieve proper orbit for insertion last long, but they deployed their solar panels, they joined the network, and they happily fell and burned up in the atmosphere. But the point is that those things, I forget the numbers, are a massive increase over V2 in terms of, I think if I'm right, it's like 10x or 20x downlink bandwidth increase. And they've changed the scope of the uplink as well. So, this stuff changes very quickly. They clearly know their game now, and they're progressing wireless technology rapidly. So it's a very believable statement.
Yep. Now, one thing that I think was just kind of staggering from the call is on the AI compute side. It says, in addition, of course, we're providing compute to others, and we are building and deploying compute, I think, faster, or our rate of growth certainly is faster than anyone else. And our efficiency of compute deployment, I think, is also the highest. So we expect to end this year with over 2 gigawatts of compute, and probably our cumulative compute online by the end of next year will be several times higher. So it may, let's say, be closer to 10 gigawatts of compute than 5 gigawatts of compute. That's the way to think about it. So if you look at this and you say, well, okay, if they're going to get to 10, roughly 10, let's say 8 to 10, we've got Colossus at 340 megawatts, Colossus 1. Colossus 2 at almost a gigawatt. We've got Macro Harder at 350. We've got Mini Hard now at 350. We've got still 8 gigawatts of compute that we don't know where that's going to go just yet. And yet they're telling us by the end of 2027. I mean, it's staggering the amount. That gray area is yet to be built.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And then Elon actually goes on later in the call and he talks about, getting to 15 to 20 gigawatts of power.
By the way, it should be said he's talking terrestrial stuff here.
Yes.
I mean, we're not even in the StarMine bucket.
No. Not even that's not even part of it. And so I think a lot of people are focused on oh, the opportunity for SpaceX is so far out, they got to develop Starship first. And it's like, no, here's the opportunity here now. And it's pretty staggering. And sorry, go ahead, Phil.
No, I was going to say what was very impressive to me was when they started talking about this potential, what I'll call first version prototype with our friends at NVIDIA, right? And what did they say, or what did he say? I'm not sure who said it exactly, but that in fact the tech stack, kind of like the pod, the development of the thing that would be the core of the StarMine satellite is essentially a version of that would be the ground deployable unit. So they're taking this incredibly, in other words, I think what Elon's doing here is he's saying, it's going back to what happened with Dojo, right? If we go back to Dojo, we realize that Dojo wasn't just a chip, it was a computer. It's a computer architecture. And as they start to look at what they want to do with StarMine, well, they have to package that in a very particular way for the deployment in space, right?
Mm-hmm.
But smartly, they're basically double dutying that packaging. And they're saying, well, there's a difference in space. We radiate the heat, and obviously we have to cool the unit a different way in the data center. But if that's his modular approach, he's basically just showing, I've got a terrestrial version, I've got a space-based version. Today, that platform would be NVIDIA. Tomorrow, it would be on the, the D3 chip or whatever he calls that, the one that would be produced by Terrafab. I mean, it's an extraordinary way of thinking about the problem, and just sort of a very Elon-esque way of thinking about, we won't use the same tech stack. And I believe that if that is the case, that when we see deployment on the edge at the superchargers, it's the same data.
Good point. Yeah. Why not?
Right. It's like 2 terrestrial versions, 1 space version, some different dynamics on cooling and power inputs. First gen NVIDIA chips, second gen SpaceX, Tesla chips. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good for NVIDIA, good for SpaceX. NVIDIA must be happy because not only do you have this customer is buying tons of, chips from them, but actually deploying them rapidly in a way that no one else can match at this point.
Yeah, and what a good relationship too, because if you're NVIDIA, you want the customer that, it's not just that you want the customer to turn over the cash for the product for you, which is really something that Tesla and SpaceX are, in the Elon Musk economy that, they do. They're probably most favored customer of NVIDIA. But you also want the product used. And so, if you bought it and you stuck it in a warehouse, or you had to make a forward commitment on it, contractually or something, because NVIDIA starts to demand that, because they're like, well, you're not going to cancel orders on us, screw you. You cancel the order, we still take your money. But I think it's a beautiful thing. And Elon says, hey, I've made good on my promises in the past to buy and use your chips on a very immediate basis. And I think, that track record makes Jensen very happy and makes him eager. And Jensen wants to participate because at some point he wants to get his, his plan has to be, I want those chips in space on the SpaceX platform, and I want them to be on the SpaceX terrestrial platform, because I don't want to get locked out of that eventually. And if I will learn through that process, and I will build better chips. And if I build better chips, maybe Elon will be, delayed in his ability to produce. And so, Jensen doesn't take it as a, what am I trying to say? Jensen doesn't take this as like, oh, I'm the only game in town. I think he just says, what a great relationship. You have a great customer, you have a great producer. very symbiotic. And as we've discussed, in the past, there's no shortage of need for these chips. So everything that Jensen makes will be consumed, and everything that Elon makes will be consumed, and more.
It's nice too, because it sort of relieves the pressure a little bit on Elon to do everything. Now, he still may, with Terrafab, you still get to that point ultimately with the scale he's talking about. But in the near term, having a company like NVIDIA squarely on your side and perhaps prioritizing your orders is huge.
Right. I think that's the key, is prioritizing his orders. So he's made these great commitments to them. They send him the chips. He puts up the data center. He sells that data center back to the other people who couldn't afford to make that order or couldn't get that order in priority queue because they don't have a build out scheduled.
They can't build as fast as Elon's building.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny little world here, right? I mean, you've got, imagine you were pushing, I mean, we've said it before, I think the most ironic and bizarre thing of all is that OpenAI will ultimately be a SpaceX customer.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if Elon will accept that, but my point is, I think OpenAI will actually have to come crawling to them because they'll run out of compute. So that should be interesting.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that's interesting too, and this really caught my eye, is this announcement or statement that they are on a trajectory to, it's including contribution from Cursor, to reach 100 billion of annualized recurring revenue run rate by the end of this year.
Yeah.
Which is staggering. And so when you look at that, here's what we know so far. Of that amount, we have Anthropic that accounts for 15% at 1.25 billion a month. Alphabet at almost $1 billion, it's 11%, and Reflection AI of 150 million a month, that's 2%. We still have 72% or $6 billion per month of revenue that's been unannounced. And by the way, Elon's comments on this, he said, to be clear, the 100 billion AAR in December is not a question mark. That's what we would achieve if we basically did nothing.
Right.
So it's already on the books, and by December it'll be flowing. Pretty amazing.
I mean, you got basically two things that are the boat anchors on this thing. You've got the CapEx worry macro thing that is going through the end. It's like, to me, it's like the whole CapEx thing is a funny thing because I think everybody is basically doing this now. They're saying, well, there's some other financial instruments that might yield better return on my capital in the near term. So I'm going to swap out of these difficult to see the future CapEx spenders. And and by the way, I'm going to throw the baby out with the bathwater with SpaceX, because then they're thinking to themselves, oh, SpaceX is just one of those. And I don't think it's quite the same thing. I mean, if you spend money and you can get a return on your investment in a year's time frame, and you can, like the CFO said, practically book it as cost of goods, that's a different relationship with the use of that capital than this projected use of frontier models by, OpenAI or whoever, right? So I don't know. To me, it's a different game, and I think that structurally, if it wasn't for the lockup overhang and the current sentiment on CapEx, the stock would have been up, as much as it went down.
So let's drill into this a little bit more, because this is something that I think is really fascinating and completely misunderstood. So here's what Brett Johnson said on the call. Okay. He says, all CapEx is not the same.
Mm-hmm.
What we're seeing right now is a situation where we're able to deploy, specifically on the AI compute side, we're able to deploy capital in such a way that we're getting less than a 1-year payback.
Right.
It's almost like your capital is becoming almost an item that you put otherwise in cost of goods sold, because it's moving so quickly. And as far as monetization is moving into revenue.
Yeah.
That's different, I would say, historically on the SpaceX level, where we're building assets that are going to benefit us from launch sites for the next couple of decades, right? Much longer term capital investment. So when you think about this, we're talking about two different types of CapEx here.
Yeah.
The traditional kind, where it's launch sites and factories and test facilities and ground stations and all that infrastructure for space, which if you build it, that's a competitive advantage. No one can touch you because you've built this infrastructure that no one has. That's fantastic, and SpaceX is doing that. But this is a new beast, and I think that the stock market hasn't yet fully wrapped its mind around this.
No, they're just, they're shooting first, asking questions later in this mode of, like, in a way, Brett said something amazing here, but he also, in some weird way, misread the room, because, people are like looking at this CapEx that flows into the AI side, and they're a bit more dubious because they're looking at the big bets by all the other hyperscalers, and they're getting, as I said, I think, if there's other places to put your capital in the short term that yield something more useful in terms of return, and you look at these kind of future points, and you're like, you're not really sure, and these things go in waves. So what will happen when there's some other changes in the broader economic situation? I think you'll see people come right back to this, and then all of a sudden it'll be clear that this payback is exactly how he characterizes it.
Yeah. Imagine for a second that you had an opportunity to invest in a real estate project. Okay, we'll call that real estate project AI data center. And you later discover that your investment you've received a return on your investment in, let's say, 9 months.
Yeah.
It would be staggering. You would be like, sign me up. I want to do more and more and more of these deals.
Two of those.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting from the company perspective is this kind of becomes like self-liquidating capital, right? The investment generates the cash needed to cover its own costs,
right,
in less than a year. I mean, at that point, it's not even a capital good, really. I mean, it's right, and that's why he's characterizing it in this way.
I know it's a really interesting thing when you start to think about the return and the depreciation thereof too.
It's totally bizarre, and the depreciation hurts your earnings, but it's a non-cash charge. But the cash is coming back in less than a year. So who cares?
The cash is there.
The cash is there.
Yeah.
Right. It's almost like you're able to recycle capital rather than deploy it.
I mean, this will get discovered, and we'll be looking back at this, and we'll probably be in love with the $110 price today of SpaceX stock, Well, I mean, I think the broader issue with the big, and it comes back to Tesla, is that this is a very unique time in the history of, I don't know, tech change and such. There's a lot of physical realities to it, meaning you got to spend money to make money. And, people, I mean, there's plenty of people understand it. They just don't necessarily want to be part of it yet. And they're uncomfortable with the delay for sure. Like you see, like you go back to Tesla, you see all these Cybercabs pulling in parking lots, and you think, when does that happen? Should have happened. Yeah. And then you think about the same thing on the SpaceX side. And it's funny because it's like the same damn playbook. If you zoom the hell out and you realize what's going on here, Elon, I think he's shown over the years that he's a really good capital allocator. And as such, people, there was an article in Barron's online or some bullshit that I posted on today where they're like, has Elon lost his magic touch with capital allocation? Because suddenly, and I'm thinking to myself, no, maybe you should reverse the article. The way you should look at it is, if you believe that he had the magic touch, then maybe you should believe that he's pushing magic in a different direction and he's just lining up for a bigger future. I mean, that's the way I read that thing.
I mean, if you think about it this way, let's say you normally invested in a capital project and it would take 10 years to get a payback.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of companies do that. And then you discover that you can invest in a capital project where you get a 5-year payback. Your board would be like, let's do more of that. I like that.
Right.
And then you figure out you can do it in 2.5 years. And they say, that's even better. Let's do more of that.
Right.
And then the CFO comes back and says, well, you know what? We figured out how to get our money back in 9 months.
I think some of the worry too is it ephemeral? Like, is it sticky? Is this really a thing that will have legs on a long-term basis? But that as we discussed 3 weeks ago or whatever the heck it was, look at those crazy charts I produced about demand versus supply. I mean, we're entering an age where there's unlimited need for intelligence. Those are all and that's all a bunch of matrix math. And it all comes back to a bunch of NVIDIA GPUs and eventually GPUs or whatever their counterpart would be called that Terrafab produces. And it all comes back to powering these things and data centers. And I mean, there's nothing, I see no other than there's another fear out there. The other fear out there is the Chinese or somebody will build a compression, the efficiency of compute will be so great that the demand won't be as high as expected. To which I say also bullshit, because we found in everything that we've ever done historically in tech, the more availability of it, people find new demand points, and stuff gets consumed.
I find that argument about, where's the demand going to come from? Where's the money going to come from? Is this cash flow to SpaceX ephemeral in some way, to be completely ridiculous, as you're pointing out. As we drive the cost of AI down, to your point, we're going to have an explosion of demand.
Right.
And the companies that are positioned to be able to supply the compute, I think, are the big winners. The jury is still out, I think, on whether the model makers are going to be that attractive.
Right.
One company may have the smartest brain for a month, and then another company develops an even smarter brain.
Right.
Where's the long-term value in that?
I mean, your point is basically, if you're a solid builder, whether you have you got the physical reality, the physical good, that is the data center that sits there, and you can swap in, like if you have an open model, Kimi or whatever, and you can swap. I mean, it's got efficiency may be something, but that thing's got to sit on GPUs.
Mm-hmm.
You go and build those GPUs. So basically what we're saying here is, if Anthropic ain't the one, or OpenAI ain't the one, and someone else comes along, you still got to run the stuff, and Elon's putting it on, building the solid foundational hardware to do that. He's in the best seat possible. He's in the best place possible. I mean, he's also building these models. Don't get me wrong. We know that a lot of spend relates to the creation. But what's interesting is, if you think about a lot of the movement in what he's doing in terms of model creation, has to do to, it's kind of copying the Anthropic playbook, which is the highest productivity, I guess you could say the stuff that people are willing to pay for is when it makes code, when your AI builds code.
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing to do other productivity tasks with it, because they're not exactly clear in the minds of all. Although it's clear to me. I mean, if you can write code in English, you can certainly do everything else in English. Universal coding language now, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean,
it's interesting. Sorry, go ahead. Yep.
No, I was just saying that, after I've been working on this NetP project for a while, as an exercise in learning how these tools work, and I made various comments. My new programming language is English, and half the people get that for sure. That just means that I can do everything I want in English, and what I mean is not just whimsical, let's ask an AI a silly question type of things, but serious productivity types of activities, whether it's in the finance side or design, doing mechanical design of some physical product, medicine, et cetera, et cetera. So this stuff is, and the other thing is that is a point I'm trying to make too, is that the AIs are getting more specialized in the ability to do productivity and in non, like they're not just trying to answer silly little questions at the LM level. We now got stuff writing code. We got stuff, reading our radiographs and determining if people have cancers or other types of,
On the revenue side, Elon made the comment. He says, one must always consider the limiting factor. He says limiting factor is currently memory. Memory output is increasing by around 20% a year. Now, normally that would be fantastically fast and amazing for any large mature industry. But he says, but ask yourself, is the demand increasing by 20% a year? No. The demand is increasing by 200% a year, maybe higher.
Right.
So if you've got demand increasing as much faster than supply, then economics 101 would suggest that the price increases. It does not decrease. And speaking of that, so, again, talking about the 100 billion ARR in December, and Elon says it's probably also worth mentioning, just like, by the way, our internal projections for reaching $1 trillion in revenue, not ARR, but revenue, have moved up from 2031 to 2030. So prior to the IPO, the financial projections we had were reaching $1 trillion in revenue in 2031. Now we expect it to be in 2030, and there's a non-zero chance of that being in 2029. So what I did was just kind of map that out and say, okay, what are the compound annual growth rates in order to hit $1 trillion from 18.7 billion in revenue in 2025?
Interesting.
Well, what would it have to be to get it in 2031? That would be a 94% per year for 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, and 31. 94% each year over those years. If they did it by 2030, it would be 122% compound growth rate. If they did it by 2029, it'd be 170% revenue growth a year. Absolutely staggering numbers. I don't know any other company that's growing this, that potentially can grow this fast. Now, again, this is a projection. Who knows what may happen? A lot of Tesla investors, I think, listen to this and say, it's this Elon being Elon. He said all the kinds of things about Tesla. He's just as wrong this time. And I sort of raised the case, well, what happens if he's not? This actually may be a fundamentally different market.
I mean, if you're putting money on the game, you probably say odds on that he's early. But there's something, ticking in his brain. And the thing that I would point out is, whether he's early or not, a couple of these so-called shots on goal are going to hit. Like, not everything he says is going to be, but one or two things will go exactly down that path, I think. I mean, the one side you could say is he didn't need to say this, but he did. And that would be the optimist would put that in their camp and say, he didn't need to say this, but he did. The pessimists or people who have gone through this sort of, Elon's version of reality distortion field would say he likes to get aggressive on these things, and it never comes true. But we're in a different game here. We really are. I mean, look, with SpaceX, he is adopting to a larger macro market here in a way, right? It's not terribly insular. Like, I mean, you can maybe make that claim about Tesla. You say, well, they sell cars. Well, they sell electric cars, and if they disappeared off the earth, the current car companies wouldn't necessarily feel like gaps. So are they really making? They've got a new category. They can say a bunch of different things about that, but here you have a lot of people coming to them, I think, that are saying we desperately demand. I mean, look, I've said a couple of times that the macro reality of SpaceX is that they're a compute company. And that the big game is StarMine. The platform that makes that worth is Starship. And that's without me talking about Starlink, which I think is also massive and transformative. But all the stuff that we're talking about in many ways is a lot of terrestrial compute, right? It's not necessarily, I don't know what part of this that he projects in all this revenue he puts into the, actually, let me ask you it this way. What part of this is StarMine?
That's a good question. In this time frame, I would imagine quite a bit of it.
It has to be.
But yet with the amount of terrestrial compute that they want to build, right? If it's 10 gigawatts by the end of next year, or let's say mid of 2028, you're potentially looking at on that 100 to 500 to 600 billion dollars.
Right.
So that's, call it halfway to $1 trillion right there.
Right. Right.
And I don't think they're stopping at building terrestrial compute after next year. I think they'll continue to build. So maybe very little of that trillion actually is StarMine.
I mean, what's interesting too is that people look at StarMine as this kind of, look, when it was first announced, AI data center, before it had the name StarMine, it was looked at as kind of a pump the stock fantasy model, and before there was a stock, at least a public company. But it's like, and when you think about the math involved, on the demand side and so forth, and then you think about, okay, why was it a fantasy to most people? Well, they couldn't see their way past, I think, maybe two key obstacles. Well, maybe three. One is they didn't understand the demand side of AI. That's easy to show. Even an idiot like me have built those charts. The second thing is they couldn't see, this guy who actually has deployed more satellites than anybody by orders of magnitude in size, there's no way he can build a satellite that can put compute in it, according to some.
Right.
And it's just ridiculous. Like if he's building, if they're launching, I don't know, close to 100 Starlink satellites a week, something like that. I don't know what the number is, but I usually see 3 launches a week of Falcon that's dedicated to Starlink, and that's about at least 75, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like, okay, Elon knows how to manufacture things at scale. He is manufacturing satellites at scale, maybe not in the unprecedented way he needs to for StarMine, but he certainly understands the problem really, really well. And then you look at StarMine and you say, okay, well, what's the problem with StarMine? Well, I have to radiate heat off these satellites. Oh, it's never been done before. Bullshit. It's being done right now with Starlink satellites. Okay, it's a little lighter weight problem, but they're generating a lot of heat too. So it's an understood problem. He understands the dynamic. He understands that problem really, really well. He understands the power problem. He understands the energy in, the heat out. And then we're left with one thing then. Okay, the third doubt is, he'll never get us Starship to be it's required. Starship's required as a platform to launch StarMine. He'll never get that done. Well, I mean, I got news for you. A couple weeks ago, while I was sitting on the beach, he launched 20 satellites into, suborbital, but these are real satellites. And so if he could build the version that do compute, I don't think we're that far away.
It doesn't appear to be, does it?
No. I mean,
yeah. The remaining issues seem pretty minor in comparison to where we've come from.
Yeah, to where they were. I mean, we know rockets blow up. We've seen this. We've seen the dramatic fashion. We've seen, we haven't seen a catch of booster in a while. The booster, stage 1. But these things start to align themselves pretty quickly. I mean, Falcon got aligned pretty quickly once they got through a couple key milestones, and then it became a durable, reusable platform. So what's in the way really here? Like, I don't get it. I mean, there's a ton of hard work, and people are going to be burning the midnight oil. That's why I made that silly comment that they don't have time to sell their stock. But that's what they've always done for Elon. They burned the midnight oil. You know, they worked the 60-hour weeks, and you know, when things didn't go well, it just meant another weekend that they're going to be sitting at Starbase, you know, welding something else. But this is what they do. They've done it persistently. They have a track record of great success. I mean, I don't know why people don't, when you see success in something, why people don't draw a straight line and say that's who you should bet on. The people who have done it before, done it at scale. The key is, like, you know, I always come back to that. I say it over and over again. There's a difference between doing something and doing something at scale. Like, enough so that's why I think we are where we are with Robotaxi today, because he's trying to build a scale business, a Waymo business.
The inclination of everybody is to say, well, everybody else will catch up. And it's like, well, you know, that's not an easy task just to catch up.
No, I mean, no one's, yeah, there'll be other people in the game.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what Elon has shown this incredible ability to persistently run faster than anybody that's trying to catch up. So somebody might catch him for a second, but he's running on to the next thing. And then I mean, all I see from my little world's view is that everybody out there is sort of using the Elon playbook. Even the ones that don't like him very much are basically, you know, everything they respond to, everything they do is like, oh, well, I need to put satellites in space because otherwise I'm getting left behind. I need to, you know, do this. I need to do that. And
well, he's forcing them to follow his playbook, because if they don't, they're hopelessly
and they're not very good at doing so.
Yeah.
So his competition's fairly on almost all of these vectors that we talked about. They're fairly weak. About the only real competition he has is in the actual frontier model space itself, meaning actually the physical AI, where, you know, there's other people that are leaders. But you know, I wouldn't count him out on that at all.
No, not at all. So, Phil, one of the things that you picked up on the call was this discussion about the you know, instead of putting cellular base stations, you know, everywhere and spending billions of capex, they talked about little femto cells around the country. This is Gwen Shotwell talking about this. She says you don't have to necessarily spend many billions of dollars in low band spectrum all up front before you deploy your system. She says, I don't want to talk about this too much. And then Elon sort of pipes up and says, well, this point is probably worth a few more words. He says, we're reasonably confident that we can deploy a large number of sort of small stations, essentially. They're really just Starlink dishes that also provide connectivity in the mobile spectrum bands and have them be all over the place. And the Starlink antennas are located in and on the roofs of houses and businesses. They've also got sort of a clear view for providing connectivity directly to cell phones on the ground. And in fact, providing connectivity that is, we think, probably better and higher bandwidth than what is currently available from cellular providers. This is an important point, he says. And you are one of the few that actually listened to him and then did some thinking about it. And you've sort of come up with this, that the cybercabs could be an important part of this as well. If you care to explain that to us.
So first, they introduced a word to many that people had never heard before, femtocell. That comes from micro, you know, you got macro cells. This is in the cellular world. You got macro cells, you got microcells, you got picocells, and now you've got femtocells, which are, you know, picocells are like, you know, 10 to the minus 12th, and our friends at our femtocells, like, we're talking about quadrillionth or 10 to the minus 15th. These numbers aren't meaningful, by the way. They're just using them as metrics to show that it's not like power. It's not a power metric or anything like that. It's just talking about the size of these things. So what they're talking about is when you first heard about Starlink competing with the cellular carriers, you thought to yourself, well, that's crazy because you can't possibly build a cell tower in space, right? But it turns out you can. But there's a lot of issues with that, and how do you get a lot of bandwidth, et cetera. Now you've got your terrestrial macro cell providers, like your AT&T, and not, basically services, T-Mobiles, and they've put in, I don't know, untold billions of dollars in these cell towers. So what these guys said is, let's build the proper end run to that process, and we're going to undercut them with this smaller model, the femtocell. Now, these femtocell transceiver mini cell towers, they exist. You can buy one. You can buy one because you can stick it in your house, and you can basically, where you have very limited cell coverage, you can become your own little cell carrier and use your broadband as the backhaul of that network. Okay. But I was thinking, well, how many, so essentially it's sort of like he's saying, I want to crowdsource bandwidth in the cellular side. And I'm thinking, well, how many of these things do you need? And you need more in the more dense areas, and you have bigger problems with the macro version of this, which is the cell tower at the satellite level, getting down to city streets, providing cell coverage there. What do you do? Well, I thought, hello, Cybercab, because Cybercab, as we know it, they announced last month that they're putting Starlink terminals, building them in, or already have.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, oh my God, what if these femtocells are just put on these coincident platforms? And now you have extreme density through the city, and you have a good spread, right? I mean, in other words, you have these Cybercabs. The more you have, the more coverage you have, and you have them really geographically spread out through the city because people go everywhere. And then I did a bit of research on, can you have a moving cell tower? Yeah, you can. It's not like we think of cell towers as these fixed objects. Well, guess what? The satellites were never going to be fixed objects. They're moving over our head at 7.5 kilometers a second.
So pretty fast. Yeah.
If you had a chance of your cell phone connecting to some dynamic object, I think I mean, this would be a much, you've got, and by the way, this is like extreme low power version of same, right? Where you've got basically these femtocell transceivers, cell towers, if you will, are, have a range of 10 to 50 meters. 50 meters, 150 feet, it's like penetrating kind of into the shops and the buildings and so forth, into the apartments, above the city streets. When you've got these things running on, like I'm saying is, I don't think you could create a great degree of density of these things with Starlink deployments, but not high density. Where could you get the greatest density? On Tesla vehicles. And by the way, I wouldn't limit this just to Cybercab. Certainly my Tesla and your Tesla could be a player.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's a really cool idea.
It's a fascinating idea. And, it's one clearly that they need, millions and millions of them.
Right.
So the amount of power to Phil's question, how much power would the cell draw? It looks like only about 5 to 10 watts. So pretty low power demand.
Yeah, it's
so you're saying that you would need a pretty serious density of these in order for it to be effective.
It's about density to customer use. And I think that the reason I brought up why Cybercab popped in my brain is I was thinking that it actually has exactly the right dynamic. They are dense where people are. They are sparse where people aren't. Where people aren't, and if it's really remote, those people are probably on Starlink themselves, just in a general sense. And therefore, they could could they serve other people on a ranch in the middle of Montana? I suppose. I don't know if you get a great degree of coverage very far away from that, because again, 10 to 50 meters of, in which case most people would say, well, if that's the case, just use Wi-Fi locally. But it's a different dynamic, right? So you got this great density in cities where you really would have your customers that would want to be on this different cellular network. And by the way, before people go, that's crazy, you don't understand cell towers, et cetera, et cetera. If I've watched the technology change over the last 20 years in terms of miniaturization, it's like higher density data on these carrier signals, in the RF, less power to do it, more consistency. Everything's shrinking. This is the right approach, right? It's like he's looking at it from two ends. I get at the macro, I guess I have the cell tower in the ultimate sky, which is satellite. That's how I serve Montana, where I don't have a lot of density anyway.
Yeah.
So that's how I serve the ranch customers on their cell phones in the middle of, out there cowboying it or something. And then at cities, well, maybe that's not exactly the right scope. Then I can femtocell this way. I can squeeze the carrier, just these monolithic macro cells. I can squeeze them on both ends.
Do you think it's a situation where if you become a Starlink customer and you get the Starlink dish, the mini or whatever it is, that they also send you a couple of femtocell boxes and say, hey, by the way, place these somewhere on your property as well?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the way they would typically do this is, I think they would just build an integrated device.
Just inside the dish.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to do this. I mean, Starlink produces a router model, right? You get this little router thing, right? When you don't want to do, mostly the way people use Starlink generally is this. On one side, it's communicating to satellites. The other side, it is a Wi-Fi device, right?
Yeah.
Like when I use it in my car, and I do now all the time. In fact, this is the coolest thing. When I got back from vacation, I put Starlink back in the car. I went somewhere. I got an alert that I had a software download. I didn't need to get back to my Wi-Fi in my garage to download because I was on Wi-Fi. The car was on Wi-Fi, known as Starlink. So it downloaded, So basically, that's the way the typical path here with Starlink is. You got your to the satellite broadband connection, then you've got your use case on Wi-Fi, your use case, our use case, using it. But people say, well, wait a minute, I want to route through, my Ethernet backbone at my house or my business, and so they have that router model. And yes, you could do that. So basically, the whole point of this is that Starlink becomes the backhaul for the data. That's the one thing that's a true statement. How they deploy, that you look up femtocell, there are products out there that you can put in your home, and they look like, they look like your classic Comcast router with a bit of an antenna hanging off of it. So like in a car situation, they would bury the rest of the radio can go somewhere. The antenna goes one place, the radio and the rest of that stuff can go somewhere else. It doesn't need to be present, or it doesn't look like a cell tower hanging off your car. As I showed before, it looks like an antenna about big, right? That can serve a couple customers, a dozen customers at short distance. This is like, I don't think they're going to get there tomorrow on this plan. And that's why I went crazy and I went right to CyberCab, because I was thinking that's actually might be the shortest path to get there in the cities, because a lot of people, by the way, cities are really somewhat, because they have great broadband fiber cable, they're the least I guess, per capita density of the Starlink terminals, right? So,
Yeah.
it's like the thing fits together just right here.
Interesting. Well, speaking of fitting together just right, I think that you have come up with something that is going to prove to be quite profound. And that's this idea of this future device. I think actually there's a lot more to this than you realize. But why don't you start off and share with us what you're talking about here? And we've reserved actually quite a bit of time, basically the rest of the show, to talk about this. I think this is actually a pretty important thing to talk about.
Yeah, so I've been wanting to write this article for some time, and I've been a bit out of the article business, and so I think I'm coming back into the article business. I wanted to write something. I was very specific about the title, The Future Device. And the reason is I wanted to talk about the technology trends on our consumer devices as we've moved from, we moved into the consumer sphere with compute devices and the names of fixed personal computers and then laptops, and then we moved into this whole cell phone era. And the thing that's interesting about, cell phone, everybody, that little rectangular piece of glass, and I make the point here, it doesn't really matter whether it's iPhone or iPhone copy, which is really kind of, the Android universe or the analog to it. It's still the same basic platform, and we are using that platform for, it is the dominant platform today. And so I think everybody has put their brain into the idea of what's next. Something will replace it. Something will replace it. And I think the go-to answer for most people is it will be a wearable. It'll be glasses. It'll be a small wearable device that you've heard OpenAI talk about. I'll put this little AI device on you, or whatever, the one that Johnny Ive apparently is building or designing for them. And, I think that's a category, and I think that will happen, but I don't think that's the device. I think the device is right in front of us, staring right back at us. It's called Optimus.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of mean specifically Optimus. And what I mean by that is, I don't mean the category of humanoid robots in general, although I sort of do. I just think that if you look at this from a different perspective of beyond the physical device, you look at the ecosystem. This is where the Tesla SpaceX kind of combination makes it actually work in a way that has all the necessary piece parts to effectively eventually replace the sort of dominant platform today as the mobile device. The first way I expressed this was I talked about HMI. And I said, as we as humans have built these tools, as much about compute as have been how we interface with them.
And HMI, human machine interface.
Yeah, how we humans interface to the machine we built.
Yep.
And the early days of that, where we didn't, we didn't interface with these things. There were these compute devices were specialized things with punch cards, and those were very weird interfaces, right? Eventually, we got to the personal computer era, and we did a keyboard and a screen, because we think about input output.
Yep.
And then when we got into the good part of the personal computer era, we brought forward the mouse, and it was each of these phases, we have much more direct interactivity with the computer we're interacting with. And then came along, really iPhone and multi-touch. And I specifically mean, because now you've got your interaction goes, you're not abstracted through a keyboard or a mouse, you're actually touching the screen. And it's amazing how quickly people adopted that. In so much that they let the difficult keyboard problem even exist in that world. Touching the keyboard was crazy, right?
Yeah.
Most people didn't think that was going to happen.
Yep.
So, what's next in terms of HMI? Well, it's very clear. We have finally got to a place with AIs that we can interact with these types of things through voice. I mean, we know people that are doing programming tools by talking to Cursor, Grok, Anthropic tool set chains. Just talking, not even typing anymore. And that's a big deal. I want to point that out. A couple of years ago, not a single one of us could believe that we would be able to speak naturally and a computer could speak naturally back to us. That's something that was not in the cards, say 5 years ago. And now it's like a box fact, right? And it's all because of AI. And then I said, okay, well, look, we've gotten to a point where all these technologies, in terms of these consumer device technologies, have gotten to us at a higher degree of interactivity, but guess what? They lack something very important. They lack agency. You know, you can talk to your phone and ask it to do something, but the thing it can't do is something physical. It has no ability to do a physical thing. You know,
Don't just sit there. Do something.
yeah, exactly.
You can't.
So now there's this thing called Optimus, and it can do everything. And it can do everything. You know, it can interact with us through voice. It can speak to us. We can speak to it. It's like talking to another human, effectively. And then it has agency like a human, like literally, like, you know, we're a general purpose machine. It's a general purpose machine. It's very specific that this thing is in fact in humanoid form. It's not an accident. It's not a whimsical expression of it. It's not trying to be a factory robot. It's trying to be a general purpose robot. And it's trying, and why be in humanoid form? Why not, you know, why be the size it is? Well, the whole world is built for us. You know, the whole world as we know it is by us, is built for us. And so certain size, and there are stairs, and, you know, so, you know, you cook with certain cookware that is built for human abilities. I make the claim that the next big wave in device is in fact this thing called Optimus. And I point out that it may be in many people's minds an absurd claim, because one of the other facets of this whole expression of technology is we've been shrinking the box. We've been making it smaller and smaller and smaller at less cost. But that being said, there are two reasons I believe that Optimus finds a path. The first is that there's no problem making an economic argument about its value. You know, it should be viewed as an object that can do work, and we know how to translate work into dollars.
Yep.
And you might think, wait a minute, that's great. I can see Optimus in a factory. I can see Optimus as a barista. I can see Optimus stocking shelves. But how do I think that I could afford it at home? Well, do your budget and find out how much you pay for yard, how much you pay for maintenance on your home, how much you may pay someone to babysit your dog, how much you may pay a nanny, how much you may pay someone who delivers elder care in your home, maybe even for you. And maybe for some of us, not me, but others, you know, how much you pay people to cook and clean.
That's right.
Well, clean, certainly. But I mean, like, you know, cook and other, you know, like, and you start to realize, oh,
well, let's just linger on the cook point and not let that disappear.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't cook, and what they do is they go out to restaurants or get fast food.
Spend all the money there.
Spend all the money there, right? Significant amount.
And effectively, they're just paying that marginal cost of labor, right? They're just, you know, they're consuming. They're not doing it themselves, and they're not, you know.
I mean, Optimus might be the ultimate threat to many restaurants.
It could.
Like, a lot of people talk about putting Optimus in the restaurant, but I'm saying that having Optimus in your home is a substitute for going to a restaurant, because why go to a restaurant where there's robots when you can have the robot cook for you at home?
Yeah, I mean, and you know, there are a couple of reasons we go to restaurants, and some of it is social and getting out. That's fine. But to your point, there's a lot of people today that really don't even know how to cook for themselves, to be honest, if you're being fair about it.
Yeah.
And so they run off to restaurants, and if they don't even look at their budget and they realize, oh my God, look at the cost of this stuff, or they bring restaurants to them via Uber Eats and these models, which are extremely expensive relative to producing that food at potentially higher quality, all the good attributes right in your home.
And this is actually, I think, a really important point, and not to take you off on a tangent here, but we often talk about, can Optimus ride in the cybercab and do the DoorDash delivery? And I think what we're hitting on here is that may not be necessary if you have Optimus in your home. There is no delivery that needs to be done because the Optimus is in your kitchen making whatever you want it to make.
Right. And possibly making it as good as, I like Dave's hot chicken. Okay, well, there is a recipe that can be made at home. The problem is often that we know that a lot of us fancy ourselves as fairly good at being in the kitchen, but we don't really want to extend the labor element to make the thing as good as, we know how to make the good thing. We just don't want to spend time making it or cleaning up after what we made. We make some really epic meals that are like as good as restaurants or beyond. And there's plenty of ways to learn how to do that these days. But every one of those things comes with an epic amount of shopping, time to clean, time to produce, and time to. And imagine that all kind of disappears.
That's right.
Same type of epic meal that's at your disposal because of this labor bot in your home.
Yeah.
So the utility value is really up there, and now you've got this other problem, and the other problem is, well, the thing is, 120 pounds or whatever the final weight is, and certainly doesn't fit in my pocket like an iPhone. So how does that work? Well, I think there's a thing that comes into play here, and I think that's where the secret sauce is. And that is that, in my mind, Optimus isn't the mind of itself. that mind actually just lives in StarMine, specifically StarMine. That the entire compute service, and I should back up a step. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I do mean the mind of Optimus more than I mean the AI that produces the physicality, the movement, the ability to navigate. That's a local AI, right? There's an AI5 chip sitting there. It's doing a lot of heavy lifting, and it's probably doing a lot of inference work for our interaction. Meaning, we talk to it. It uses that AI to, But there is no reason in a universe where you just talked about the dominant communications component that SpaceX wants to deliver to the world at every corner. Ocean, seas, lakes, high in the mountains, in remote areas, cities. Okay, so that what you now have is you have a complete communications layer that is omnipresent. You're bathed in communications. You're bathed in a network. So now this Optimus isn't an island. We think of our phones. We obviously don't think of them as an island. In fact, that's the word phone. The idea. First we did calls with them, so they weren't really an island in that sense, and then we expressed them through data, right? But we think of Optimus as kind of being on its own. It's like, oh, it's going to be its own little edge compute device. But I say, no, maybe, but its mind literally sits in StarMine above the Starlink component. And maybe it's 100% of its mind. Maybe it's a piece of its mind, or maybe it's the mind when you turn it off. But the point is, like, you can work an example in your brain. It's like, well, how would I take it everywhere with me? Well, guess what? Optimus can be on your phone. So we think about these things as phones. What I'm not saying is, just like the PC hasn't disappeared when the phone came about, I'm also saying the phone doesn't disappear just because Optimus. I'm not making the argument that it's the replacement device in that sense. I believe that there is a digital Optimus. I believe there is a companion device, and that is just the mind of Optimus brought to this companion device.
I think what you're saying here, though, Phil, is that the phone survives, but it's no longer the central, center of computing.
In fact, there's a little section said, is Elon building a phone? And I say, no, yes, maybe. And what I mean by that is what the phone becomes in this universe is, as you said, a very lightweight edge device.
Yeah.
It doesn't need a lot of compute. It doesn't need an app ecosystem at all. Really what it is it's a comm device. And the communications it is delivering, it is taking in tokens and computing them in StarMine and delivering them back to the device through a conduit called Starlink.
Is the phone at that point, though, really just a way for you to communicate to Optimus? Is it really nothing more than that? If Optimus becomes the central...
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean it can't do some edge compute. There's not a universe where you have to subtract all the edge compute. But the point is that if you think of the mind of Optimus living in StarMine itself,
Mm-hmm.
and by the way, I mean this a little differently than people might say, no, Phil, that already happens. You can back up your phone to the cloud and you could lose your phone and restore it to another phone. No, I'm talking about the live existence of the thing, like its permanent presence. In fact, when I mean it so directly that I mean that you could start your beginning relationship with Optimus before the physical bot is ever delivered to you.
Right.
You could have a year-long relationship with Optimus. It's just in the virtual form through StarMine. It exists. And when the robot shows up at your house and you know it as Fred, whatever, that personality, that history, that context window just is instantly there. When you move from point A to point B, your interactions become potentially your car or maybe just your companion device known as your phone. And when you deliver yourself to a destination point, like you're let's say you're going on vacation to Miami and you show up there, you just get an Optimus at your hotel or airport. And for all intents and purposes, that Optimus is no different than the one you left in your house.
It's a bit like having your own Secret Service. They're just there wherever you show up. They are already there.
Yeah. So, I mean, what this is it's a very different view of how you might look at like what if you look at the way the phone developed. Clearly, it had communications. We shouldn't dismiss that. At first, communications were simply voice, like literally simply voice, and it was in the analog side of that. It was really it was a phone. It was a phone aimed properly in the early days, and then at the time we had iPhone, we now had a data device, and the word phone, started to feel like a little bit weird. Move another half generation forward, and we barely make calls, and we use it mostly for data. So it's really changed in form.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think about it took a while to develop its ecosystem. And that ecosystem is very app centric today. So, if you want to make a reservation, change a reservation, set up a meal, with United, you pretty much have the United app on your phone, right? If you want to do a stock transaction with Schwab or one of the other brokers, you pretty much have the Schwab application on your phone. If you want to, and I could go on and on. And so that ecosystem developed. It's very app centric, obviously built an extreme amount of revenue for Apple and of course the Android counterparts for Google, et cetera. But at the end of the day, it kind of eked itself into that broader universe of communications. And what I'm saying is Optimus doesn't have to start that way and play on the network. It is the network.
Yeah.
It exists the way we hear about it in movies, So when we think about StarMine today, what are we thinking? Well, we think about AI data centers doing somebody's compute. Well, my claim is that it will be doing somebody's compute. It'll be an instance of everybody's device, their Optimus device. Tesla will be the customer. Eventually I actually think The companies are very much the same company, but so Optimus kind of is instantiated first in StarMine. That's where it lives. That's where its constant presence is. Unlike the iPhone, where it backs itself up to the cloud and restores itself to the cloud. That's not the plan I'm talking about. I'm talking about a sort of living presence already in that space. Then it uses a conduit known as Starlink to communicate to all the physical endpoints. The most important physical endpoint is the physical Optimus that we're talking about. And then the secondary and tertiary endpoints are our companion devices known as phones.
The car also is another version of it, right?
Yes. That's why I said tertiary, because we can certainly use a car as a transportable Optimus. It could be the interface to Optimus. And what's interesting too about that, the point I make about the companion device is, as we were saying, it can become lighter and lighter weight. Because if the primary thing it does is communicate, and it does it really well, then it's only about 15 milliseconds away from its brain and above our heads at about 300 to 700 miles.
Yeah.
That's nothing.
Yeah.
It's a real-time device. And that's why I said in my article, is Elon building a phone? No, yes, maybe. What I meant is he'll never build a phone. He doesn't need to build a phone. If he's going to build something, he's going to build a so-called companion device. And sort of like this other thing we've been talking about, how you scale and go around the existing players, you don't produce $1,000 device. You build a $150 device that's a great communicator, but doesn't really need all the compute and memory and so forth on device. It doesn't need the compute to run apps because it never is going to run an app.
That's right.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing too is, as I hear you speak about this, I think about you don't need to physically own the robot for it to be yours.
No.
Right. So think about a situation where perhaps there's a community, maybe I'll just say there's 5 homes, and people in that community want Optimus's labor for a certain number of hours a day to cook, clean, etc.
Right.
They could all share the Optimus. When the Optimus arrives on their front doorstep and the help next door, the Optimus at that point is theirs. It has their brain as soon as it hits their doorstep.
Right.
And then when it goes to their neighbor's house, that person's brain is acting, it's an Optimus at that point, right? The physical body doesn't matter.
Nope.
And that's kind of interesting too, from a shared perspective, in terms of people just using the Optimus for the number of hours a day that they have the need for.
Yeah, I mean, you could imagine, I'm not suggesting this is the rollout plan, but you can imagine a big rental center where you rent them for a few hours a day. They're delivered by Cybercab delivers one for 2 or 3 hours in the evening while you need cooking and cleaning, and that's all you use it for. There's never a program to buy one in the first place. You just leave by the hour, and it's very fluid in the number of hours. It could be, it could be 2 hours a day. It could be 24 hours a day. I think we all talked about that in the past, that's probably the model that Tesla will eventually, or not eventually, probably lead with, is just you lease the thing. I mean, the beauty of this too is that the physical thing doesn't matter. It could be doing work in the yard and get run over by a truck and nothing disappears. The last 5 years of conversation with your Optimus. See, the thing is, you're going to develop, for lack of better definition, a relationship with this object. And that relationship will be a very familiar type of thing because, it will have a very deep context. And as such, having it in its virtual form, on a plane, on your phone, isn't much of an inconvenience other than the lack of its agency. In other words, it can't do something for you. And I mean, it actually can do something for you remotely, but that's another story.
Well, that's very handy though, if you're on a plane, for it to be able to do something in your house.
Yeah.
Say, hey, there's a delivery outside, please pick it up. Or they already know that and just take care of it. You can instruct it in any way you want.
Yep.
Oh, I forgot to, bring the plants inside, and is it going to be a freeze tonight? Please bring in my flowers or
Right.
something. Yeah.
Right. It's also, I think I point out in the article that it's not only the first device that we can use that has agency in this physical form, but it's the first device as a compute device where we can have this sort of remote relationship with it. In other words, it doesn't have to be on our person. It can be in the other room doing something on our behalf.
Can be on another planet doing something on our behalf.
Yeah. But I mean, certainly what I mean by remote too is just the fact that you can send it off to shop. You can send it, down to the neighbor's house to pick up a package. You can have it walk into the kitchen and start doing its, cooking the meal. You can have it go upstairs and change the bed sheets while you're sitting there watching TV, But I guess the point I'm trying to make in the whole thing is don't think of Optimus as the physical manifestation, although the physical manifestation is the thing that gives it actual physical agency. That's an incredibly important attribute that sets it apart from every other device that we've ever interacted with that isn't that. And I mean, when I say not every other device, we have a Roomba. It's a robot, goes and does things. We actually have FSD driving us today, but this is a little general purpose, right? This doesn't have the constraints of, I mean, FSD does one thing and one thing really good. It drives us around. It doesn't do shopping for us. Ironically, Optimus can drive us around, which is a real head trip if you think about what I just said there. Like, wait a minute, are you saying Tesla's producing a product that could kill off FSD? Yeah, but you got to get it from Tesla to kill off FSD. So good luck with that.
That's right.
These are important things. It's going to have incredible agency. It can certainly at some point operate a tractor or could drive a semi. It could,
literally everything. So, what we're talking about is migrating from any device where the intelligence is localized to, it's the intelligence that's the key, and you can put it on any device.
Right.
Commonality in that intelligence, your intelligence, the collective intelligence of a civilization, essentially, which is pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
But, as I hear you speak about this, Phil, what's clear to me is that Optimus is essentially a joint strategic product by Tesla and SpaceX.
Yeah. Look what's on that screen in front of us. I mean, 2 of the 3 components here are SpaceX properties. One of the physical component is a Tesla property. And if you thought about Elon making the yes, no, maybe of the companion device, well, who knows? I mean, that can be viewed as coming down this path of a device that's a communications device that naturally interacts with Starlink. Or on the other hand, you could think of it as a Tesla Tesla has more of a track record of, I shouldn't say track record, a brand or whatever you want to say, about being more of a consumer-facing company. But you know what the reality is? It makes it very clear to me that, and I said directly in the article, that if you didn't see a path for these companies being the same company, now you do. This is the path, because I think this is the ultimate manifestation of all the piece parts.
Yeah.
You can invent small versions of these things. You can say, oh, I want Starlink in my car. That's great synergy. Let's combine the companies. That's not necessarily a necessity for the combination of the companies. This feels like it is, because StarMine isn't just a data center now, but it is a data center. The thing is different about StarMine is StarMine starts to think of, it's like you said, well, where is this AI? Like, what goes in StarMine? Well, maybe Google, maybe OpenAI. In other words, the terrestrial carriers today that SpaceX is delivering services for can be leased in the cloud. I laugh when I say that. The cloud, way up there.
Yes.
But the reality is, if you think about what they probably want to do eventually is to simply say that this is our compute infrastructure. And what are we going to compute? Well, when you hear people talk about digital optimists, you might get this very strange view that's, oh, I see. It's a funny little name that is a desktop product that's agentic and can go off and do a bunch of things and drive screens and so forth and so on. And I say, well, it's not how I think about digital optimists. That may be sort of its first manifestation, but the reality is digital optimist is optimist.
Ultimately.
Yeah, it's just a virtual presence of the thing.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, these companies just look like one. I mean, you just almost can't separate them much further.
The other thing too that's interesting to think about is we go from, one device per person to unlimited number of devices per person potentially.
Right. And we see that in sort of the direct mapping of Optimus to the factory, right? We think of it as, and the way you would think of it as the one-to-many relationship there is sort of the manager and the workers, but we certainly could think of Optimus as a one-to-many relationship in our homes, in our small businesses, most certainly in our small businesses. I mean, and I would say that's another weird blend here because Optimus has agency, because it can do work as we define work in the physical space, the line begins to get a little fuzzy between what is business and what is consumer in a very different way than we were before.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, maybe I mean something very profound, and maybe I need something that's very direct. But the more profound thing is, perhaps you take Optimus to work with you, and you have 3 or 4 Optimists doing things that your employer. It's a weird thought, but very possible. Like, you don't just show up as a singular entity that does something. You just manage a group of Optimists, and you're almost like a subcontractor to your employer. You bring your own labor. So it starts to disappear the line. And by the way, nothing makes Optimus not be your personal Optimist either, right? You can basically say, this one over here is my personal Optimist. These 3 are sort of, but every one of them I can call by a name. I mean, I'm not, not just trying to map them to human, but I'm saying every one of them I can have an individual, distinct relationship. And perhaps the other weird part about it is every one of them can be hive-minded as well. That's the other thing that we haven't really said. But what that means is not only, at first we kind of described that in the space of saying, well, what if I got on a plane, I left my physical Optimus behind, I took my companion device that became my digital Optimus for a while until I got off the plane, and I reinstantiate in physical form at the hotel or the airport. Well, but why can't I have just 2 of them working together and operating as a single unit?
Sure. Or 100 of them.
The high-minded approach.
Yeah.
Which means that now the one-to-many is a weird thing, because the many isn't really a many. It's just a many in physical manifestation, but not necessarily many in terms of context or mind.
And it's also the flip of that, right? It's one Optimist to potentially many humans. So I think about, for example, in my household, right? Me, my wife, 2 kids. The Optimist is going to have 4 bosses. It's going to have 4 people giving it commands at the same time.
Right.
There's going to have to be a hierarchical structure in terms of who gets what done first. I'm sure I'll be at the bottom end of the heap there, but Optimus will be saying to me, "I'm sorry, Cern, but I can't do that right now."
Yeah, sorry. No, that's absolutely true, because I think, outside of all the potential endpoints and how we might see the thing, the probable relationship is we think of it as a physical device. We think of it entering our home, and we think of it as, having that one-to-many relationship, but where the many is us, the household members, and we have the relationship with the one, and the one is it. So it's like you said, it's sort of inverts it, and there's just one in the home, and it does all the work. It does the stuff that your wife wants it to do, stuff that your mom wants it to do. If it's involved in some more elderly care,
Yep.
does a few things you want it to do. It does something your kids want it to do. And the beauty of it is because it is this new HMI, for the first time, we have the ability to interact with it in a very, I think people may get a little confused. They say, oh, this is going to be very confusing. Not really, because whenever we bring somebody in our house to do something, we know how to interact with them, because all day long we interact with other humans.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the interactivity of the thing.
I wonder too, Phil, if as humans, we will also be trying to find ways to be helpful to Optimus so that Optimus can do its job in an efficient manner. Because initially, certainly, there may be certain things where Optimus is not particularly efficient at it. Of course, it's only going to improve. But initially, it'd be like, here, Optimus, here's the knife that you need, and then you hand it to the robot.
I believe that's a long section of thought on how do we train Optimus, become the proper companion to us. And, we think about Optimus. Look, the interesting thing about Elon's discussion, and maybe this should have been said earlier, when Elon talks about Optimus, he thinks about how many times has he said this? Who wouldn't want their personal CP3O R2D2? If people don't know the reference, Star Wars, the cute, I guess it's a little odd and strange that they're two different robots, but nonetheless, that worked really well for the movie. That's not what Optimus is. It's just sort of more like CP3O. But when he says that, I think you have to actually take him a bit more directly. And what I mean by that is, I think he is talking about a consumer device. I think he is talking about the ultimate generic device. I think he is talking about this article, because I don't think he's saying, oh, I'm building a robot that operates. I'm Figure, and I'm going to go build this. Is it Figure who's employing him in BMW factory? Somebody else, I think that's
Yes.
I don't think he's thinking that way. I think he's thinking, no, it's a consumer relationship, but I'm going to redefine the consumer in the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And be somebody who uses a product like an iPhone for, life stuff as well as business stuff. I can consume what comes from the device in various different work environments, including the functional stuff that we think of as factory, service industry, small business, et cetera, But I think he's saying something here. I guess maybe in some ways you could claim he's not. He's just trying to make a way for us to all understand the thing. And he, saying, oh, that, everybody knows what CP3O is, so it's easy to think of the Star Wars thing. But I actually think the way he's thinking of it is, I'm not building that factory robot. I already have robots in my factory. Now, that doesn't mean that he also doesn't have a huge shift of people coming in and out of the building. And if you think that this kind of robot isn't useful, I would argue that you should situate yourself outside a Tesla factory or anybody else's factory and watch your shift change.
Yep.
Because you see thousands of people coming in and coming out.
That's right.
So I'm not discounting that element of it at all. I'm just trying to uplift it to a different space. And I'm saying that maybe for the first time, the way we think of as a consumer device should be redefined.
It's interesting too, I think back to our earlier discussion about the CapEx spend by SpaceX to build the terrestrial data centers right now.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, develop Starship so that you can build StarMine and put the new versions of Starlink, right? You see right here in this image how critical that CapEx and that development cycle is.
Yeah.
To get all this in place to allow what you're talking about to happen.
If you think about that on a very simple basis, if you look at Starlink back in its infancy, and then yarding back to a previous conversation we had about an hour ago about Elon making comments about like commercial viability, right? He was saying that, we have to re-educate our commercial customers because they thought of it as a backup network, not as a primary network. And they may not understand that it isn't a backup network, it is a primary network. And now a lot of them do understand it. Those who work for United and putting them on planes, those who work for Carnival, sticking them on cruise ships. And these are the things that how their customers access the internet. They get it. They get it. They know it has, good uptime, and it is effectively their primary. I guess there is it can't be a backup on the plane.
No.
It can be a backup on the cruise. But having said that, what is true is that Starlink is becoming that thing that I've written about several times, that it is sort of, we are disappearing into the network. We are starting to have a relationship with a network where it's omnipresent. It's not geographically omnipresent, meaning it's not like, right now, we think of, sometimes some of us think of our cellular providers as like, that's the way, I'm always on the network. Yeah. Drive across the country and see how that works out for you.
Mm-hmm.
Especially get off the highway for 20 minutes. So our remote friends that live in Montana and upstate New York and God knows where, they don't have that relationship with the network at all. They think of it as sometimes available and a lot of times not. But what's happening here with Starlink is they're getting to that tipping point, and that's maybe the right term, where the network becomes, we are sort of bathed in a network and everything is on the network. And this is an example of at least two physical manifestations of a product being on the network in a way that suddenly requires the network. It's not, you might suggest your phone requires the network, and that's a fair statement in a certain respect. But the architecture of how I'm pushing this is I'm saying Optimus lives in that thing called StarMine. That's the primary living, creature of Optimus.
Yeah.
And everything else has to be given to us by virtue of this omnipresent network. So you've got to build that, and that has taken years, and it is reaching the tipping point where it is really going to be that omnipresent thing. You have to build StarMine, and I think, the good news about StarMine is it takes so much, it borrows so much from Starlink. In terms of being able to build satellites at scale and know how to power them and know how to vent their heat, and that form part of the structure. And they both effectively share a platform, not necessarily the same one right now, but soon to be, they'll share the same platform for getting them there into those orbits, namely Starship. So, it's a different relationship for sure with a product that we haven't really had before.
It's funny because when people throughout the ages have pointed to higher intelligence, they've always pointed towards the sky.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess they've intuitively understood that StarMine is there or coming.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing too,
by the way, I just want to put a little asterisk here. Interesting, it's called StarMine, isn't it?
Yeah.
What I mean is it could have been a lot of things. And I started thinking about StarMine as the central character in this story because of the name. In other words, I think the name is a little bit more purposeful than we might think. And that is why I've leaned in so heavy on this idea that StarMine is really the central character. You might think when you think Optimus, it's the physical bot. And I'm saying, no, it's not the physical bot. That is the appendage or the edge. That's the edge device. Not that it's not super important. Don't get me wrong. It's like almost necessary, but
when you think about economics, there's typically this division between labor and capital. And what's interesting about all this is I think that distinction goes away.
Yeah, I agree.
Optimus, capital is labor.
Yeah.
Labor is capital. It's one and the same.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
and
certainly,
that's
yeah, certainly the traditional relationship to labor is completely upended and bent into pretzel by this idea. You know,
yeah,
it's a very different thing because it blurs the line between white and blue collar labor. There is no distinction between these objects either now,
right.
because this thing, and imagine taking, and I don't mount, I'm not trying to sound demeaning and I don't want anyone to take it this way, but imagine taking your most intelligent person who is CEO of the company and then saying, you get to work on the factory floor. You don't, we don't, and we can have hundreds of you doing that. And what I meant by the demeaning part was I didn't want to demean the blue collar worker and say, oh, well, you just don't have the brain to be that person. But
Mm.
in some ways, there is some truth to that. And but this that changes this relationship completely. There is no distinction between our so-called white collar labor force and our blue collar labor force with this type of agency. There's no distinction.
You're right. It's also true that anybody can be CEO and command a company's worth of robots.
Right.
Right. We're seeing that today with these AI agents that effectively they're doing the work and you're commanding them with the English language or
Right.
any language.
Right.
So that's interesting too. But from a robotics standpoint, the hardest jobs right now to quote unquote replace are those difficult blue collar jobs.
Right. Absolutely.
All the stuff that's been done by a computer,
Yeah.
even mathematical theorems from the brightest minds in the world that have not yet been solved are being knocked out by AI on a weekly basis.
Right.
So all the Einstein level things that we think are reserved for just the smartest of the smart, AI is knocking those out in the weekend.
Yeah.
So it is kind of interesting, isn't it? These distinctions that we have drawn of where we think the value is, or who's smarter than who. It's like, well, this has all been upended by AI.
It made me think of something, and like one way of looking at StarMine is that on a certain number of GPUs runs this omnipresent agent that you contract with, and that is your Optimus, and it makes its way into the physical device, and it makes its way into the companion device and any other tertiary endpoint that you need to work with it. And that's probably a true statement. That's how we think of our AI today. But um, and what I mean by that is we think of there exists a model, and we are running through that. We are running that model through inference, and that the only context that the only survivable context is the context we push through it, so to speak. In other words, and this can really have a much bigger impact because now suddenly you can build a collective intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is, if people go back and read some of my articles, what I say about Optimus is that it is the ultimate data collector on planet Earth, or planet Mars, or planet whatever, because unlike us, its sensor set is capable of a much higher bandwidth, and possibly, I mean both wide and deep, meaning like right now we think of it as, our whole world is limited to this little visible spectrum, and we think it's
Mm.
but over here is infrared, over here is ultraviolet. Were you kidding me? Like the whole world exists in a much broader spectrum,
Yep.
and beyond just that electromagnetic spectrum, there's many of other sensor components that exist. And when you look at the observable world and you say to yourself, oh, I get it, we know everything about this, that, or the other thing. Oh, bullshit. We know almost nothing about the observable world. We have observed through the tiniest of straws what that world is all about. And so now, if you think about Optimus existing in our house and just doing crazy things that you would never, like, oh, I see some ants coming in. Let me start counting ants on the property. What? um, a billion weird data observational things that suddenly can become a collective intelligence that is way beyond our ability to collect that intelligence. And I mean it that way, because send out, university studies. We send somebody's got a PhD thesis. He sends out a bunch of undergrads to collect data, and they collect a small sample set, and they call it a day. And they write out, and somebody writes their PhD thesis, and they explain how the world works through a statistically insignificant data set. Suddenly, you have the ability to build a large, significantly relevant data set that, on an observational basis, is mind blowing, and just its ability to correlate data that you've never had anything like that before. Now, at the same time, there are challenges, and the biggest challenges are privacy. Privacy and intellectual property to a certain extent, like in the sense that if I train that Optimus to cook, I own a restaurant, I train that Optimus to make my meals. Well, I don't want the hive mind. I don't want the intelligence gathered and say, well, if he can make penne alla vodka perfect, I can transport it to every other restaurant that buys that Optimus. That's a non-sellable value proposition. I mean, it is for the person who wants to copy, but it's not very good for the person who wants to protect.
That's right. This is an important question, isn't it? Because intellectual property is something that we should protect.
Yeah. Well, in fact, that's what makes the world go around, in a sense, right? I mean, you can make your arguments in different ways, but the other truth is that we need some really good. We need privacy and boundaries. We need to, because the thing can observe all day. It's in our house and it can see us naked. I mean, I know it sounds kind of goofy, but it hears everything we say. Our arguments with our family members, and we need to protect.
It might also act as a marriage therapist and save you a lot of either money or time or whatever it is.
But I mean,
so you feel like observing your interactions with your wife, and I think it's time we have a conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is not the way you tackle this problem. I see your argument on repeat. How about I break the logjam?
Yeah.
I do write a little section. I don't get into necessarily this whole collective intelligence, and nor do I talk much about privacy, but I do talk a bit about some of the challenges. And one of the key challenges that I think that I kind of bring it back to Apple a bit. Like I kind of, because I spent 10 years of my life at Apple, and I feel like the relationship, what I respect about Apple beyond, they fumbled the ball in Apple Intelligence, profoundly, yes. I mean, that's like, of course. But when I think about what they get right, is they understand brand, and they understand how to build consumer brand and how to make it feel right and be acceptable to the most number of people. I was talking to, actually, it was not just me. It was you and me on a previous one of our episodes. We were talking to Robert Scoble.
Yeah.
And he said something about glasses at Google. And he said, well, Google's the company for geeks, meaning that like people don't really associate Google with kind of generic, everyday consumer brand.
Right.
Yes, a lot of people have Gmail accounts, but we don't think of it as like, is that the company that's going to bring us the best glasses? Would it be Meta? No, Meta has a terrible, even if they've locked up Ray-Ban or somebody else, they have a terrible relationship with the consumer on that basis. It's not their, and you know what I would say? Tesla isn't really there yet either. You have to be very careful how you build this bot in terms of its appearance. It can't be too sinister looking. It can't be too friendly. It's got to be right. You can't look like a scary utopian type of bot. It also can't look like it has a cutesy face, because those things get disposed of beyond their utility, and whatever their utility, they get disposed of in the minds of people as being, cartoony and not, and what Apple gets just right and I don't mean perfect because nothing is, but they do build products that appeal to the broad base of consumers that aren't in these little buckets of, you know, tech people or geeks or this or that, you know. And I think there's a lot of challenge here for Tesla to produce this perfect bot, you know, the perfect CP3. It needs to, I use a weird term that I'm not saying I invented the term. I just say a brand is like you have to have a certain mouthfeel. It has to have this feel on your palate that is very, very hard to write down. What did I achieve in my brand? Like, what are those edge, you know? But good brand people achieve it all the time. Bad brand people never achieve it. And that's the distinction there. Tesla has a lot to do there. And I feel like, in a sense, some of the way they present themselves is very Elon-esque. Not to take away from the guy because I love him, but in many ways, he leans into a universe of, you know, he names products like Cybercab and Cybertruck. Well, cyber is not a very friendly term, most.
No, it's not much the most approachable.
Yeah. The good news is Optimus is a pretty friendly term for a bot.
Yes.
If we're being honest.
Well, it also implies something too, like a you know, a future of abundance, right? You know.
Yeah. Optimism.
Yeah.
Optimus has like optimism and agency rolled up into the same word.
Mm-hmm.
Really damn good word.
Also, kind of it's a future-looking word too, which is nice.
Yeah, but not so future that it starts to feel utopian or dystopic type of thing. Yeah. Before I meant dystopic. So there's the challenges there, and they've got a lot of lifting to do. I mean, the good news about something like Cybercab is, damn, that's a very presentable product to the actual consumer, meaning like everybody that's going to use it in the cities, it's a lot more approachable than a Waymo, for God's sakes. It, you know, and it has some elements of, it's approachable, but it's not gimmicky looking, and it feels like luxury without truly being luxury. That's really hard to achieve. I think it achieved it except for its name.
The vehicle looks better than its name.
Yeah. And by the way, the name will be fine. I'm not going on a limb here. I'm just making a point that Tesla has a lot of the two companies here, SpaceX and Tesla. Tesla, I think, obviously has the best relationship with the consumer because it builds consumer products in the name of cars, which are consumer products, for God's sakes. But, you know, SpaceX tends to have a pretty damn good way of presenting itself. I noticed, you know, watch the last two concept videos that they dropped. My 84-year-old mom watched that, and her mouth was open the whole time, and she loved it. And I don't think she ever wanted that video to end.
They did a nice job.
What's that?
They did a very nice job with those videos. Very impressive.
So I claim combining the two companies might be a good thing, because I think that at some point, you know, I mean, people might even make the argument that the SpaceX earning call is what they wish the Tesla earning calls would look like, and perhaps the CEO of one company should talk to the CEO of the other company and figure out what's going on.
Well, when you're adding $100 billion a year in revenue, that gets pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's not hard to think. But there was a good call. It was a good call, though. They communicated clearly. And the people in the call seemed like adults in the room. At the same time, they seemed approachable. It was a good call.
It was.
Okay.
Phil, thank you for this. And I think your thoughts here on the future device, I think, are excellent. I'm glad we had an opportunity to kind of flesh out some of these ideas. I think you're onto something here. It also helped, I think, paint the picture how difficult it is going to be for other companies that can't build this entire ecosystem.
Yeah, because this is the first consumer product that almost is defined by its ecosystem, not builds one.
That's right.
You know, Apple built one. They started
Yeah.
with a flagship product and they built that ecosystem. And in the beginning of time, Steve didn't even want, he sort of wanted it, but he didn't, like, because he didn't open up the thing.
Yep.
But they opened it up enough to build that ecosystem. They built some proprietary parts like Apple Music, but then they let the Atmosphere go.
Yep.
And they built that and curated over time. This one, I think, is rather defined by it uniquely. And therefore, the good news, it is hard to compete with.
Very interesting.
Yep.
Well, thank you, Phil. And I look forward to our next discussion in 2 weeks.
All right.